Gonzaga's non-conference schedule is so packed, the team had to find another marquee team to play in a charity exhibition just to get themselves fully prepared.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Friday, and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by FanDuel. Folks, get started at FanDuel with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. All right, folks, jam-packed episode here going into the final weekend of September and the final weekend of the offseason here on Locked On Zags. Starting next week, we are back, baby, 5 days a week as we get to the very start of October. Craziness in the Kennel, player preview series, and then boom, 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 we are getting into the season, which is going to start a little bit sooner as we talk about this charity exhibition game. We'll get to that. We also talk an NIL payment drama, proof that a rev share model and schools directly paying players is the way to go. This is not working. We'll talk about what's going on at UNLV and at USC to close out the show. We're also going to talk about the latest rumors around the Pac-12. Speaking of UNLV, they have become a big hinge right now. Pac-12 Mountain West negotiations. It sure looks like the Mountain West is winning. What does that mean for the Pac-12? What does that mean for Gonzaga? Could they still even be interested in leaving for the Pac-12? We're going to talk about all of that. But we start the show with the news that came out. I think it was Thursday morning, maybe it was Wednesday evening that we first heard this was reported. Jeff Goodman reported it. Theo Lawson wrote it up for the Spokesman Review. Gonzaga will be facing USC, the Trojans, in a preseason charity exhibition game. The report from Jeff Goodman indicated the game will be either October 26th or October 27th. Again, the season starts officially on November 4th. Gonzaga taking on Baylor at the Spokane Arena on the first day of the season. So it makes sense they want themselves a little tune-up. And instead of playing a team like Lewis Clark State or Eastern Oregon or somebody of that nature, Gonzaga is getting their tune-up game against a Big Ten opponent in USC, a team that has a dramatically new roster from last year. Again, this game, either the 26th or 27th of October. It's going to be at Acrisure Arena in Palm Springs, California. This is in an arena that hosted Arizona, Michigan State last year. So there's been some big-time college basketball played here in the past. The event, again, we said it was a charity exhibition. The benefits, the proceeds are going to the cardiovascular care unit at Eisenhower Hospital in Rancho Mirage, California. There's never a bad time to play a basketball game where the money raised from the basketball game is going to help people in need. You cannot ever be mad about that. This is a good opportunity for Gonzaga to do something good for the community, to play a marquee opponent and get yourself more prepared for the regular season. These are win-wins. We've talked about charity exhibitions in the past. We've seen Gonzaga do a handful of different things with them. We've seen the pay-per-view style. We've seen them play tune-up, like true tune-up opponents, like non-Division I teams like Eastern Oregon or Southern Oregon or Lewis Clark State, like we mentioned. We've also seen them play more marquee teams. And now we're seeing them kind of under that charity exhibition side of things. The last time it was a charity exhibition specifically for Gonzaga was before that 22-23 season when Gonzaga played Tennessee. They lost that game. I think that kind of caused a little bit of panic around the fan base, but charity exhibitions are charity exhibitions for a reason. This will be a unique game because it will be against, again, it doesn't count for the record. So you'll see probably some experimentation, some things that maybe they're just each team's going to try out. But this is a completely new USC team. Completely new. There's no possible way to scout this team without watching film of 12 different teams last year because USC is just made up of players from all over the country. Andy Enfield, the head coach at USC last year, left. It was kind of one of those I'm going to leave before I get fired situations. He took the head coaching job at SMU as they transitioned into the ACC. That resulted in Eric Musselman leaving Arkansas to come across the country back to the California area where he's from to take over at USC. That, of course, led to John Calipari leaving Kentucky for Arkansas. Mark Pope leaving BYU to go to Kentucky. Was one of the most interesting, wild, chaotic coaching carousels we've seen in college basketball in a long time. And it started with SMU firing their basketball coach. Definitely did not seem like that was going to lead to John Calipari leaving Kentucky, but here we are. USC was not good last year under Coach Enfield, despite having the presumed number one pick in the draft, Isaiah Collier, who fell to the late first round. They had Bronny James on the roster. Of course, he missed part of the season, including the game against Gonzaga, while dealing with a cardiovascular injury, a heart issue suffered over the summer before his freshman year. Boogie Ellis is gone. Everybody's gone. Everybody's gone. If you remember a single player from USC last year, they're probably not there anymore. But that doesn't mean there are not going to be familiar faces on this USC roster for Gonzaga fans. Among them will be Wesley Yates. Wesley Yates was a prominent recruiting target for Gonzaga in the 2023 recruiting class. They were going after him hard. He's from Beaumont, Texas. Ultimately, he ended up landing at Washington, had some family connections on the coaching staff there. Spent all of last year as a freshman at UW, but did not play because of a knee injury. Coaching staff was turned over in the offseason. That meant Yates didn't have that same connection anymore. He hit the transfer portal. He lands at USC. I'm very excited to see if Wesley Yates plays in this game. This could be some of his first real college basketball action. Again, it's a charity exhibition, but I'm hopeful for the kid. I was excited about him when Gonzaga was interested in him, and I'm hoping that he's somebody who can have a productive college career. I think he was a little underrated in that 2023 class, so this might be a first good look at him. Other names familiar to Gonzaga fans: Kevin Patton Jr. Was a freshman last year at San Diego, was one of the most productive freshmen in the country. He and Tyler Harris at Portland were kind of the two standout freshmen in the WCC last year. And in previous eras, players who pop as freshmen at schools like that end up becoming school legends. They build statues of guys like Alec Wintering and Johnny D and Kevin Foster from Santa Clara, those types of guys. And yet instead what happens here is Tyler Harris transfers to Washington and Kevin Patton transfers to USC. Just a bummer part of the new era in college athletics. Matt Nolan was Yale's best player last year in Gonzaga's season opener against Yale. He was their best player all season long. That name might sound familiar to some of you who watched that Yale game and or who watched Yale upset Auburn in the NCAA tournament last year. Matt Nolan has also transferred to USC. So has St. Thomas from Northern Colorado, Desmond Clodd from Xavier, Chibuzo Agbo from Boise State, Bryce Pope from UC San Diego, Josh Cohen from UMass. Altogether, USC has the most points per game total joining their roster via the transfer portal of any team in college hoops. More than Kentucky, more than Louisville, more than some of the other teams that had massive overhauled rosters. Take that stat with a grain of salt. Obviously, the total number of points per game transferring into your team is not a particularly important metric in the sense that it doesn't measure competition level, and it obviously is going to be a quantity over quality type stat. But it's still notable that Eric Musselman went out and got a whole bunch of dudes who know how to put the ball in the hoop and put them on his roster. We're going to see what that looks like. This is a great tune-up game for Gonzaga because the season starts right away. I mean, you bring Baylor to Spokane to play them at the arena on November 4th. Baylor's a top 10 team, probably a top 5 team when that AP poll comes out. That is a monstrous first game to have. You got Arizona State in the Big 12 on November 10th. You got San Diego State on November 18th. Then you got the battle for Atlantis at the end of the month. Then you got Kentucky, UConn, UCLA, all spread out throughout December until conference plays begins. Yeah, there's going to be some bye games sprinkled in there. We already know about the majority of them. You got UMass Lowell, you got Long Beach State, you got a couple others that are in that mix as well. But for Gonzaga, you want to be ready for this season. And they may not have felt that an exhibition game against a non-D1 opponent would adequately prepare them to pick up potentially what would be a huge win for them against Baylor on November 4th. So why not schedule it against a team that has a lot more talent than those D2, D3 programs that they could play, but that is also going to be trying to figure out what the heck do we have with this roster? Where's everybody going to play? How are we going to make this starting lineup work? It's a great opportunity for Eric Musselman to see how his team looks against high-level competition. It's a great opportunity for Gonzaga to play a talented team before the season actually gets going to kind of see how they stack up against a roster like that. And of course, it's a great opportunity to raise some money for people in need and a hospital wing that are almost always understaffed and underfunded. So good things all around for Gonzaga with this exhibition game against USC. Well, USC is no longer in the Pac-12, but we are moving on to talk about the Pac-12. Realignment momentum came to a screeching halt for Teresa Gould and the Pac-12 Conference. Suddenly it doesn't look like a league Gonzaga really needs to be joining. And we're going to talk about what that means for the Zags, what that means for the Pac-12, what they can do to change my mind on that topic. All that coming up in just a second. Right after I tell you about today's sponsor, Robinhood. Folks, Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for the high society. Now the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.5% APY on uninvested cash, receive unlimited 1% deposit bonuses, and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on an IRA account. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at robinhood.com/gold now. Terms apply. For product-specific disclosures, visit robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rate may change, and gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold LLC. All right, folks, segment 2 here, still locked on Zags, still Andy Patton here hosting the show, and we're talking about conference realignment. Once again, it is the talk of the college space right now. There's a handful of major developments going on in the Pac-12, the Mountain West. It affects the AAC. Now it's affecting the MAC potentially. We're thinking it's going to potentially impact the WCC, the WAC, all sorts of mid-major conferences being dramatically impacted by the Pac-12 attempting to rebuild following the disaster that was the last year when 10 of the 12 member institutions bailed to the Big 10, Big 12, and ACC respectively. So as a quick recap, the Pac-12 did strike a few weeks ago, landed 4 schools from the Mountain West in one fell swoop: Boise State, San Diego State, Colorado State, and Fresno State. After some negotiations with a handful of other programs, they ultimately landed Utah State at the beginning of this last week. So they now have 5 schools joining from the Mountain West. Those 5 schools will become full members in July of 2026 alongside incumbents Oregon State and Washington State. That's 7 programs. Pac-12 needs to be at 8. They need to be at 8 football schools specifically in order to be a conference at the FBS level. So one more football school is clearly, unquestionably the top priority right now for Pac-12 Commissioner Teresa Gould and that conference. The problem is that the other conferences that feel like the Pac-12 is coming after them are mobilizing, and they're mobilizing fast and they're mobilizing effectively. The American Athletic Conference already said, we are good. Memphis, Tulane, UT San Antonio, South Florida all banded together and said, we are staying in this conference. The offers from the Pac-12 were not good enough to entice these schools to leave a mid-major conference to join the Pac-12. That is not a great sign for what the Pac-12 is able to offer. That is not a great sign for these. I mean, these teams don't feel like they're confident that they're going to get a better deal, more money, more media exposure, whatever it may be, by joining the Pac-12. Obviously, there's other factors there. Maybe they feel it's a slightly better financial package, but it's not offset by the travel, et cetera, et cetera. Regardless, it puts the Pac-12 in a position where those schools were not hinges necessarily, but vital programs that they could potentially invite that would help boost the value of the league. And now they're no longer options. And then Gloria Navarra, as the commissioner of the Mountain West, worked very hard. There's still some litigation, still some legality stuff going on, but was able to convince the other Mountain West schools to mobilize. UNLV says we're good. We're staying in the Mountain West. Same with Air Force. Those are monster schools for Mountain West to keep, and huge losses for the Pac-12 as they no longer get to pursue those 2 schools. Hawaii has said they're staying put. Other schools in the Mountain West have said they're staying put as well. We'll see if the Pac-12 can try to wrestle away somebody like a New Mexico or a Nevada, but I don't think it's going to happen. I think the Mountain West has said we're sticking to it. They're going to go out and try to get a UTEP or a Texas State or maybe even Sacramento State, somebody like that, get up to their number that they need to be at, and then they're going to call it good. So that makes the Pac-12 kind of in a pretty tenuous spot right now. And if you've listened to the last couple episodes, you've been reading my work at USA Today, writing about this topic, this might be the time, finally, where the Pac-12 says, okay, we need to make this pivot. We need to focus on building a basketball conference. Again, they need to get one more football school. They're not going to ignore that and just go get 4 basketball schools who don't have football and then not be FBS eligible. That's not going to happen. They are going to get at least one more football school, probably from the reporting I've heard from speaking with John Canzano and others. It sounds like they're trying to get to 9 football schools. So I think we'll see 2 football additions, and then we'll maybe see some basketball additions. And that's what I want to talk about here, because the appeal for Gonzaga to join this conference takes a pretty big hit if Memphis isn't in, if UNLV isn't in. I know UNLV didn't make the tournament last year, but they're a 20-win team. They're in a desirable media market for basketball, for Gonzaga specifically. To not have UNLV is a tough loss. It also means no Nevada. Nevada is a team that made the tournament last year. If they're not getting New Mexico either, that's another tough loss. No Memphis, no South Florida, no UNLV, no other Mountain West schools. This league just doesn't look that good. For football, the options for the Pac-12 are Texas State. They're okay at basketball. They've had some success despite not being at the D1 level for very long. UTEP and Sac State, who are non-factors. North Dakota State, North Dakota, any of them non-factors in the basketball space. UConn, except they're only pursuing UConn football. UConn is independent in football right now. UConn joining the Pac-12 as a football-only member, honestly, probably the funniest thing that could happen. That is hilarious. I get it. The Pac-12 needs football teams. UConn needs a conference. It makes sense. But it is geographically a nightmare for one football program from UConn to be playing all these schools over on the west side. It's just a messy potential situation. But I get why the fact that it's being talked about and pursued, and the fact that it makes sense that this being pursued is kind of proof of how just chaotic and crazy all of this is. But if you're Gonzaga and you're seriously considering the Pac-12 as an option over the WCC, and you look at the teams that are already there and you're thinking, yeah, this is pretty good. These are some good teams, a lot of teams that made the tournament last year. You're kind of hoping the rest of the additions that they make further bolster the basketball side of things. And Texas State and UConn football, not going to do it. Not going to do it. That's the thing that Gonzaga has to weigh right now and the Pac-12 is not going to make decisions based on whether this is going to make Gonzaga happy, I don't think. But at some point, does the Pac-12 say, well, what if we just, we're not going to get any marquee football brands. Let's get the best ones that we can, and let's pivot to go get Gonzaga, and also convince them by saying, we'll bring you St. Mary's. We'll bring Grand Canyon. We'll bring Wichita State, who's in the American Athletic Conference, who does not have football, who is not a fit in the American Conference because of that. Bring them over. If the Pac-12 comes back to Gonzaga and says, we're going to add you, St. Mary's, Grand Canyon, Wichita State, we're going to build a basketball super conference. We're going to have, 7 or 8 teams that made the NCAA tournament last year. We're giving you a full share or very close to a full share. At that point, Gonzaga really has to think about it. But again, a full share wasn't enough to convince Memphis to leave the AAC. Would a full share offer to Gonzaga? Yes, Gonzaga doesn't have football, so a full share is more appealing, but is that still enough to convince them to leave the WCC, where they are the top dogs, where they're getting a higher rev share, where they get that double bye in the WCC tournament? Are they willing to leave the WCC to join a conference where football is the priority? Even if they're building a basketball conference, they're still trying to win on the gridiron more than anything else. The resources are still being allocated primarily to football. Does Gonzaga make that move? I'll tell you right now, if Gonzaga is not being pursued along with other basketball brands, if St. Mary's and Grand Canyon and Wichita and those types of basketball teams aren't even being discussed, they're just saying, hey, we're going to build the best 9-team football conference we can, and we'll add Gonzaga only as a non-football member. I don't think that appeals to Gonzaga very much. The league's still better than the WCC top to bottom. Right now, it already is. San Diego State, Boise State, Colorado State, Utah State, all consistent NCAA tournament caliber teams. Washington State made it last year. Neither Oregon State or Fresno State moved the needle, but they're not as bad as the bottom half of the Pac-12, of the WCC. If you're talking North Dakota State as your other addition, or Texas State, or New Mexico State, teams like that, none of them are great. But again, they're comparable, if not better, than what we're typically seeing from Pacific and Portland and Pepperdine and those teams. So it's still a better conference. But if it's only slightly more money or a similar amount of money, and you're going into a conference where they're not going to treat you the way the WCC treats you, I'm not sure it's going to be viewed as worth it. So the Pac-12's, or the Gonzaga's in an interesting situation now where they're still expecting to be pursued by the Pac-12. I think everybody's expecting that an offer is going to eventually come from the Pac-12 to Gonzaga, probably once they finalize this football side of things. But if their next few moves don't move the needle at all for basketball, I'm not sure that that is enough to entice Gonzaga to leave. I think we're barreling to a situation where the only way Gonzaga leaves is if they are promised, hey, we're bringing some other basketball programs in, like Grand Canyon, like St. Mary's, like Wichita State, whomever it may be, because otherwise I don't think that this ends up being all that appealing for the Zags. And they have proven in the past that they're not just going to leave just to leave. So if they don't feel that the Pac-12 is demonstrably worth it, either financially or from a competition level, or ideally both, they're not going to do it. And the way that things are trending right now for the Pac-12, I'm not sure they're going to be able to put together a package strong enough to entice Gonzaga to leave what has been a really good thing for them for the past 30 years in the WCC. Well, we talked about UNLV and USC already in the show. We're closing out the show talking about those two programs once again, but for a completely different reason. UNLV in particular made major headlines this week as an unfulfilled NIL promise is plaguing college sports. We're going to talk about what needs to change coming up in just a second. Right after I tell you about FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. When you get in the hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you place your bets. And you can get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Currently, folks, it hasn't changed. Gonzaga plus 2,000 odds to win that 2025 national championship. It's worth the $5 investment. You get the $200 in bonus bets either way, and potentially in March you're a little bit richer while watching the Zags cut down the nets. Check it out at FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, folks, closing out the show and the week, continuing our conversation about the state of college athletics. We talk Pac-12 realignment drama and where we're at right now. This is an ever-changing story, so hopefully stays up to date at least through the weekend while you're listening to the show. Talked about what it means with the AAC schools mobilizing, with the Mountain West schools mobilizing. Also talked about Gonzaga's charity exhibition against USC. And now we're closing out the show talking about another storyline that has kind of plagued the college athletics space over the last couple of days. It started with a report that UNLV quarterback Matthew Sluka is redshirting for the rest of the season. He is their starting quarterback. He led UNLV to a 3-0 start this season, which included wins over Kansas and Houston. UNLV has traditionally not been a very good football program. For them to start the year 3-0, including 2 wins over Big 12 schools, a Kansas team that was ranked earlier in the year, that is a borderline unprecedented start to UNLV's football season. And now their starting quarterback says, hey, I'm done. I'm done for the year. I'm redshirting. I'm intending to hit the transfer portal at the end of the season. I had unfulfilled financial obligations from UNLV. As the report continued to unravel, what we learned is that he is saying he hit the transfer portal and committed to UNLV in part because he was promised $100,000 in NIL money from the boosters at UNLV. All indications are that this was a verbal agreement. It was not written down. There was no actual contract in this conversation. UNLV paid him $3,000 moving stipend and has recently offered to pay him $3,000 a month for the rest of the season, which is $12,000 total, which is $88,000 less than he was reportedly promised by the school. He said, that's not good enough. You told me you were going to pay me $100,000 to play here. You're not paying me $100,000. I'm not going to play here. He makes his announcement, red shirts, done for the year. So here's the thing about this. Some people are saying that, there's a competing storyline coming out saying, the team got off to a hot start. He's played well. Now he's demanding more money. The school's not willing to or doesn't believe they have the legality to start paying him more money because he's playing well. That's pay for play. That's against the rules. They're not going to pay him more money. This is him just being greedy and his agent trying to demand more money. Some people are saying, his agent screwed up. He should have got a contract in the first place. That's his fault. He needs better representation. Some people are saying, heck yeah, put the team on blast, put the school on blast. They should be paying you what they said they were going to pay you. This is BS. I don't know which of those things is true, how much of it is a combination of all three of those things, but it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter because all of those are fixed by the thing that needs to happen in college athletics, which is required contracts, revenue sharing, schools directly paying players. Going through the NIL collectives is not working. There was a great SEC, they have a coaching meeting, a coaching conversation with the media. I think it's like on Tuesday mornings typically. It happened right after this report came out about the UNLV quarterback. So the coaches were talking about this. We got great quotes from Kirby Smart at Georgia, great quotes from Brian Kelly, the head coach at LSU. And they basically said this, like, we can't control the NIL collectives. So it's very frustrating when we make commitments to a player. We talk to our collective and say, hey, we want to promise our running back X amount of money, or quarterback X amount of money, whatever. Collective says, yes, we're done. We got it. It's good. And the collective doesn't pay up. And now the player is wanting to leave, is frustrated, is leaving. The assistant coaches are getting blamed. The coaching staff's getting blamed. They're not the ones who have anything to do with it. That system needs to change. It needs to change. It's not working the way that and it's going to. The plans are in place for that to change, but it's just so clear that the lack of regulation right now is causing all sorts of problems. Again, whether this is an issue of a kid just trying to be greedy, if he'd signed a contract and now he's saying, I want more money because I'm playing well, you say you signed a contract, problem solved. If he's telling the truth and saying, hey, I didn't get paid and you told me you were going to pay me $100,000, what solves that dispute is having a contract signed. If the issue is that his agent did a bad job and didn't get an actual commitment in writing, guess what? A contract solves that problem too. I know it's not as simple as just hand out mandatory contracts, pass them out. Like it's going to get messy if you're doing that. You're going to have negotiations, and that's why I think, the conversation about our general managers coming to high-profile college athletic programs. We saw Adrian Wojnarowski take the job at St. Bonaventure as a GM, and I think we're going to start seeing more of that, because I think we're going to start seeing this too. But this is just what makes the most sense to me. Again, Sluka wasn't the only player to do this. A running back at UNLV also said he's redshirting. Bear Alexander at USC has said he's going to redshirt and miss the rest of the season and transfer at the end of the year. We saw it with a Washington player as well. This is starting to happen. It's going to happen in basketball. It's going to happen in basketball. We're going to find out that guys are not going to play in the conference portion of the season. They're going to redshirt after the first few weeks of the year. They're going to just shut themselves down and decide to transfer whatever it may be. We're going to, I promise you, we're going to see it. I don't think we're going to see it at Gonzaga. I'm not sure if we're even going to see it at programs that are particularly relevant to Gonzaga, but we are going to see it. And it just seems to me like being able to sign players to contracts, and they don't all have to be 4-year contracts. You could sign a guy to a 1-year deal. You could sign a guy to a 2-year deal. If you're a mid-major coach and you're trying desperately to land a kid and he's still, on the fence about, well, I could go to this high major program and they promised me a decent amount of money, but only a 1-year deal, I have to sign a 3-year deal there, or whatever it may be. Whereas the mid-major coach might say, hey, we're going to give you a starting job. We're also only going to sign you to a 1-year contract. Sign for 1 year. We'll give you this amount of money. Maybe it's not as much as you might get at Texas, but you come to UT San Antonio, come play for us for a year, sign a smaller contract, start, have the ball in your hands constantly, ball out. You go average 15 points a game. You hit the transfer portal. Now you go sign a 2-year deal with Texas, and they're going to pay you a lot more money. Mid-major coaches are going to do that. They're going to make those kind of promises. That works for them. It's not great. They'd rather have those guys for 4 years, but that's not happening anyway. So go get them that way. Players know what they're getting into. They know what they're signing up for. If you sign a 3-year contract and you want to transfer after 2 years, you can. You just lose that last year of your contract. It's no longer promised. Like there's going to need to be some rules, some stipulations. Are you giving money back? What does that look like? There are parts of this conversation that still need to be ironed out and finalized, and it'll never be perfect. There will always be ways for teams to game the system, things like that. But right now, it's a lot worse than perfect. It's a lot worse than perfect. The fact that we have no idea if this player is completely making up this story, if he was actually promised $100,000, if the school had any intention of paying him $100K, like we don't know any part of this story other than what is being said and the he said on every side. But the fact that there's a solution that seemingly would have prevented any of these problems from happening, or at least would give us a much clearer picture of what happened, it's pretty clear that's the direction that we need to go. It's different in football and basketball. Basketball, smaller rosters. Obviously, that makes a different impact in terms of how much money you're throwing around, how long those contracts are, things of that nature. But I do think that something along these lines is going to make the most sense. And I'm hopeful that we will see that going forward. It creates more transparency for coaches. It creates more transparency for players. Maybe it creates more transparency for fans. That's one aspect of this. I don't know that you're publicizing the contracts necessarily. If I was an 18-year-old kid, I don't necessarily think that I would want my first contract with the college basketball team to be public knowledge, but I don't know if that's avoidable. Those are other elements of this conversation. I'm not sure exactly how they get solved, but I think it's clear we need to move in a direction of having a lot more transparency around these deals and where this money is coming from and things of that nature, because right now it's not sustainable the way that it is. And we're seeing that. I mean, a program like UNLV losing their starting quarterback because of a financial that cannot continue to happen. This cannot continue to happen. It is a pretty serious problem, and it's going to impact basketball, and hopefully it'll get resolved soon. But right now, it's not in a very good spot. Not a super happy way to end the show, but that is where we're going to wrap it up for today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. One of the last shows here in September. We got one more on Monday, and then that week we are back 5 days a week, starting our player preview series, getting you ready for craziness in the kennel. And now, of course, just a couple weeks after that, we will be getting you ready for that exhibition game against USC as well. Folks, have a fantastic weekend, and as always, go Zags.